You've seen this footage, maybe in a physics class, maybe in a documentary. Maybe you came across it at 2 in the morning and couldn't look away. A bridge, moving like water, twisting, rippling, and then, piece by piece, disappearing into the sound below. Most people think they know what caused this. Most people are wrong. The Tacoma Narrows is a stretch of water in Puget Sound, Washington, roughly a mile wide, flanked by steep bluffs. And in 1938, a strategic problem. Fort Lewis was on the south shore. The Bremerton Naval Shipyard was across the water. The only connection between them was a ferry. The Washington State Toll Bridge Authority needed a bridge. Their chief engineer, Clark Eldridge, designed one, a 600-foot main span with 25-foot deep stiffening trusses that would resist the wind. Conservative, solid, estimated at around $11 million. Federal officials rejected it. Too expensive. Enter Leon Moisseiff. He was, at the time, the most celebrated suspension bridge engineer in America, a contributor to the Manhattan Bridge, the Benjamin Franklin Bridge, and the Golden Gate. Moisseiff promised to bring the cost down from $11 million to $7, and his method was bold. Make the bridge longer and far lighter. He stretched the main span to 2,800 feet and replaced Eldridge's deep 25-foot trusses with shallow 8-foot plate girders. On paper, it was elegant. Washington's own state engineers protested. They called Moisseiff's design, in their words, fundamentally unsound. Clark Eldridge was among them. He would later say they'd been told they couldn't have the money without using plans furnished by an Eastern firm of engineers, chosen by the moneylenders. They were overruled. Construction began in November of 1938. Pacific Bridge Company built it. Bethlehem Steel fabricated the steel. The cable wire came from John A. Roebling's sons. Federal money from the Public Works Administration covered 45% of the cost. The bridge opened on the 1st of July, 1940. The third longest suspension span in the world, after the Golden Gate and the George Washington. It was immediately obvious something was wrong. From the first major concrete pour, the deck moved. In anything above a light breeze, it would heave in long, rolling waves, 2, 3, 4 feet of vertical travel, rippling along its 800-foot center span. The workers who built it gave it a name, Galloping Gertie. Engineers were consulted. Cable stays were added. A study was commissioned at the University of Washington. None of it stopped the motion. The professional consensus was that the oscillations, while unusual, were not dangerous. That consensus was about to be proven catastrophically wrong. November 7, 1940, a Thursday. At 7:30 in the morning, the wind at the Narrows measured 38 miles per hour. The bridge was doing what it always did, undulating in slow waves, 2 to 5 feet of vertical motion. Normal by Galloping Gertie standards. Clark Eldridge, the engineer who had objected to the design, crossed the bridge at around 8:30 that morning on his way to the office. He noted the motion was actually milder than on other days. He went to work. Professor F.B. Farquharson, an engineering professor at the University of Washington who had been studying the bridge for months, drove in from Seattle with his cameras. By 9:30, the wind had climbed to 42 miles per hour. And then, at 3 minutes past 10, something changed. The motion was no longer a wave. It became a twist. One side of the roadway rose while the other fell, then reversed. Back and forth on a roughly 5-second cycle, the deck tilting to angles approaching 45 degrees. Leonard Coatsworth, a news editor at the Tacoma News Tribune, had driven onto the bridge just before the change, with his daughter's dog in the back seat, a black cocker spaniel named Tubby. He wrote what happened next in the newspaper that same afternoon. Just as I drove past the towers, the bridge began to sway violently from side to side. Before I realized it, the tilt became so violent that I lost control of the car. On hands and knees most of the time, I crawled 500 yards or more to the towers. My breath was coming in gasps. My knees were raw and bleeding, my hands bruised and swollen from gripping the concrete curb. Coatsworth made it out. Others on the bridge did too, barely. A college student named Winfield Brown was thrown off his feet again and again, knocked flat each time he tried to stand, until he could finally scramble clear. Tubby would not leave the car. Several people tried to reach him. Coatsworth first, then a news photographer, Howard Clifford, who got partway out before the tilting drove him back. Finally, at around 10:55, Professor Farquharson edged out along the heaving center span, opened the car door, and tried to coax the dog free. Tubby, terrified, bit him on the finger. Farquharson made it back to solid ground moments before the span let go. At 2 minutes past 11, a 600-foot section of the center span broke free. It flipped completely upside down and fell 195 feet to Puget Sound. The impact threw a geyser more than 100 feet into the air. Coatsworth's car and Tubby fell with it. By 10 past 11, the collapse was complete. The only fatality was a dog. Every person on the bridge survived. Here is where most accounts get it wrong. For decades, and in many physics textbooks to this day, the Tacoma Narrows collapse has been described as a classic case of resonance. The story goes like this. A steady wind pushed the bridge at its own natural rhythm, adding a little energy with each cycle, the way a parent pushes a child on a swing, and the bridge simply shook itself to pieces. It's a clean story. It is also physically wrong. In 1991, two engineers, K. Yusuf Billah and Robert H. Scanlan, published a paper in the American Journal of Physics for one specific reason: to correct the textbooks. Here is the problem with the resonance explanation. On the morning of the collapse, Farquharson measured the bridge's destructive twisting at 12 cycles per minute. That's about 1 every 5 seconds. But at a wind speed of 42 miles per hour, the gusts peeling off a blunt shape like the bridge deck pulse roughly 5 times faster than that. The two rhythms were nowhere near each other. There was no resonance. And here's the part that gets lost. The original 1941 investigation board, which included some of the most respected aerodynamicists and structural engineers in the world, had already said so. They wrote, in their own report, "It is very improbable that resonance with alternating vortices plays an important role in the oscillations of suspension bridges." The physics textbooks weren't correcting the engineers, they were misreading them. So what actually brought the bridge down? It's called aeroelastic flutter. And the difference is everything. In resonance, something on the outside pushes the structure. In flutter, nothing on the outside pushes it. The structure drives itself. As the deck began to twist, its new angle changed the way air moved over it and under it. A flat road had become an angled wing, and a wing generates force. That force pushed the twist a little further. The further it twisted, the more force it made. The more force it made, the further it twisted. A feedback loop, self-sustaining, self-amplifying, and above a wind speed of roughly 35 miles per hour, effectively unstoppable. What flipped the bridge from gentle galloping into that fatal twist, at exactly 3 minutes past 10, is the part we're still less sure of. The leading explanation is that a cable band slipped near the middle of the north cable, splitting it into 2 uneven lengths. That changed the bridge's balance just enough to drop its breaking point below the wind that was already blowing, and the twisting began. That's the leading theory. Not every researcher considers it settled. The wreckage of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge settled on the floor of Puget Sound, where it remains today. The concrete and steel have become an artificial reef, one of the largest in the world, and now a protected dive site. The Washington State Toll Bridge Authority reimbursed Leonard Coatsworth $814.40 for his car and everything in it, including Tubby. Leon Mosef told reporters he was completely at a loss to explain the collapse. His services were not in high demand afterward. He died in September of 1943, less than 3 years after the bridge fell. The American Society of Civil Engineers now gives an annual award in his name, the Mosef Award, for distinguished work in structural design. A recognition of a career that, by every measure before that Thursday in November, had earned it. The Investigation Board's report, delivered in the spring of 1941, changed how every suspension bridge after it was designed. Wind tunnel testing of scale models became standard practice. The proportions that had made Galloping Gertie one of the most flexible large suspension bridges ever built became hard limits in every design that followed. The replacement bridge opened in 1950, with deep open trusses, a wider deck, and wind testing behind every dimension. A second span opened alongside it in 2007. Both stand today. Clark Eldridge, who had fought the redesign and been overruled, returned to work on the replacement bridge. He was there when it opened. What the Tacoma Narrows collapse gave the world was not a warning about the power of wind. It was proof that engineers had been measuring the wrong thing. Bridges had always been built to carry weight. After November 7, 1940, they had to be built to breathe. Every suspension bridge raised since has been tested in the wind. Every span checked for the kind of instability that took this one. The rules that protect those structures and the people who cross them were written in the fall of 600 feet of steel into the cold water of Puget Sound on a Thursday morning in November.